One of the age-old debates that is going to happen today and tomorrow in the context of Bitcoin is, why is Bitcoin developing into multiple layers? And the first key reason for this is, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin. Data, money. And so the context of everything we're going to talk about today is the fundamentals underneath the Bitcoin blockchain, but also why new layers are going to be built on top. But first, let me introduce myself. Hello there, my name is Jake Scanlon. I'm the lead educator here at the Hashpower Academy. This is a place for you to learn anything and everything to do with Bitcoin and also its underlying network of technologies and commodities. Now, as mentioned, the topic of today's video is going to be looking at the Bitcoin layers and why they're going to essentially be built into fruition. And this is because there is a data constraint, that Bitcoin, data money, has a cost to produce. So it's a database at this layer 1 level, a series of blocks where transaction information, that information, your Bitcoin, in wallets. And when you want to move it, you have to update that information. And we don't want all the information to be centrally controlled in one location, like a central bank, because money is just a technology of communicating resources in society. We don't want all of that information centrally controlled in one place. We all have to have a copy of the same transaction file distributed among all of the nodes of the world. But who gets to hold the pen of that accounting system? It's the Bitcoin miners, all seeking to produce energy all around the world, or buy it and consume it to convert and produce compute power, which adds Bitcoin blocks to the chain. That is that most fundamental layer 1. And so the question becomes, well, why do we need a layer 2? And why do you think there'll be other sorts of layers, such as social layers and layer 3s? Well, it all comes down to this. The deeper you go in the layers in relation to you as a person communicating to the Bitcoin blockchain, whether it's paying fees to store in this transaction layer 1, that is settlement. Layer 1 is really focused on settlement. Layer 2 is more about transaction velocity. And what I mean by this is, what's the difference between a fast and ever-increasing volume of transactions, such as on the Liquid and Lightning networks? Well, the difference between that and the layer 1 is, the layer 1 is constrained by time. Blocks are every 10 minutes because the network is constantly trying to understand how much Bitcoin mining compute is online at any minute, or every 2 weeks, shall we say. And if more hash rate comes online, blocks accelerate, so the difficulty adjustment increases to make the cost to add the next block in the chain more difficult. And so there is all of these physics constraints to the layer 1 blockchain, and the layer 2 wants to essentially accelerate that. That is to say that a lightning network, shall we say, is like a lightning bolt bouncing between different nodes. But all of these different nodes of the Lightning Network are all connected because they've used the layer 1 blockchain to contractually connect a quantity of Bitcoin between these different nodes. And if there is a certain balance of Bitcoin between all of these nodes, and you want to send some Bitcoin to this person, you can just shift the ownership transfer through the system between you and that person that you're sending Bitcoin to. This doesn't have the limitation of the 10-minute settlement requirement on the layer 1. So it's not adhering to Bitcoin's time-constrained physics, but it's constrained in data space because the layer 1 blockchain is where that settlement finality is found. So when you're adding Bitcoin in Lightning addresses and accounts, you have to communicate with the layer 1 blockchain. If you want to settle the amount of Bitcoin in your layer 2 balance, so to speak, back down to that layer 1, you have to communicate with the Bitcoin layer 1 blockchain. But that whole aspect is speed. So we're going to just write these in. Settlement, speed of transaction. Remember, Bitcoin, data, money, all of this is a communication of data. For example, we produce energy, transfer it over time. Produce compute, transfer it over time. Produce data, money, transfer it over time. All of this is a communication of data. Layer 1 is constrained by energy, space, and time. 10-minute blocks with a cost to produce to update that information. That gives Bitcoin its electron value. The layer 2 is breaching that and lifting, constraining that, that quantity of Bitcoin into a layer 2 so that speed is reduced from 10 minutes to almost instant. This is what we want. And the best finance analogy for this is a clearinghouse is when large institutions essentially settle their transaction information. Similar to how the Bitcoin blockchain is settling every 10 minutes, these institutions can be quite quick during the day, but it could take multiple days where two banks have got lots of transactions and trade between each other, and they do that settlement finality with a clearinghouse, clearing the transaction volume that they've built up between each other. And that sort of place is not where they're going to itemize the list of a coffee purchase, are they? They're not going to settle a coffee purchase. So where does a coffee purchase reside in these layers? It's going to be the layer 2. That makes sense because it's a transaction that's important enough to be paid, but it's not a large enough amount of money relative to an expensive good. For example, if you were purchasing a house, that is some form of trade and transfer of the ownership of an asset and that settlement of payment to pay for it. That makes sense on the layer 1 blockchain. You need some form of ownership transfer that has settlement finality. And this also scales to country level, that if Bitcoin is a currency based on energy, and energy seems like one of those resources that nations invade other nations to control their energy resources, and that's to sustain the power of the fiat money system and price it beyond the gold standard, or even the pricing of, say, dollars to gold. Once they removed the dollar from gold, they needed some other commodities of very high importance to the world, such as energy. So we have essentially a decade's worth of oil attachment to the money, and that's because if you stimulate and force other nations to exchange their money into dollars to then buy the very resource that they want, oil, it gives this artificial value to the fiat currency by pricing it in the thing that everyone wants. Now, if electricity is something that everyone wants and Bitcoin is mathematically connected to electricity, what do you think the value of Bitcoin is going to be in the future when you've got this fixed supply currency with energy and compute expanding underneath it? It reprices that fixed supply money against all of the energy in the system. And as you arbitrage trade out of the system, it makes different participants in the network more profitable. So layer 3, the social layer. This isn't quite clear at the moment because the layer 2s are just about sort of defining, well, everyone's sort of discovering all these different layer 2s, but the interesting thing about the layer 2, they need layer 1 block space. This is most fundamental, whether you're a platform, exchange, bank, hedge fund, sovereign wealth, institution, you name it, everyone needs layer 1 block space, which is produced by pools and miners. And that layer 3 is the utmost highest volume of data, pictures, music, other expressions of human creativity, not so much needing to be stored in Bitcoin layer 1 block space, not so much maybe stored in layer 2 transaction volume where we're focused on speed, but it's just that aspect of social. I apologize for my handwriting. And that social layer is going to be needing, the speed of transactions. No one's going to want to post things and wait for it to confirm. They want to post something in the social side of things. And so these are the sorts of things such as NOSTR. NOSTR is quite interesting, a sort of decentralized social media where you can store the data that you want to store, essentially on your own, your posts and whatnot. And it's using things like Lightning as a way of people being able to pay each other. If you follow someone, you like what they say and talk about, that you can send them a few sats basically, or zaps, I think they call them. All these sorts of things of that integration of high volume of data versus scarce amount of data for settlement. So it's the cost to settle the data is more expensive the deeper you go. And for the reasons that you've got all this transactional noise the higher you go in the layers. But interestingly, this is exactly the same concept. All this sort of transactional noise that I'm referring to is that, yeah, everything, the Bitcoin blockchain expresses like a funnel of data at and everything on the underside of the Bitcoin blockchain is an expression of energy, really. Electrical energy, digital energy, if you want to call hash rate that. And so you've got this expression of raw fundamental energy that's most intrinsic to humanity, and the communication of energy and data, which wealth is essentially energy. So when you go into money, and money is basically energy. So yeah, that's an interesting direction of things. So I think I've over-explained this. Basically, the overall gist of my scribbles here are the Bitcoin blockchain is energy, space and time, physics and maths in the digital world, which is a complete phenomena in of itself. And that trifecta, that framework of X, Y, and Z builds opportunity to act as Michael Saylor likes to refer to, it's like a digital Manhattan. And that bedrock in the digital world allows transactional data expression to expand and build in layers on top. As to the decentralization of the different Liquid and Lightning and all these others, I'm quite interested in Babylon chain or Spider chain or something at the moment, and all these other sorts of things. As to how decentralized they are, they're going to have to push to incentivize people to create and generate create a copy of their transaction information. And the more people have the same copy of the same files and there's no single point of failure, that's decentralization on the digital side. And then decentralization underneath, that's very much established. We do have centralization issues with pools, even with miners. Energy sector, not so much, because it gets more decentralized the further you go from the blockchain on either side. I think that's it. Yeah, layer 1, settlement. Layer 2, speed. Layer 3, social. Hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry for the scribbles, but there we are. Hope you enjoyed. Comment section is for you. Send this to the group chat. Send it to anyone and everyone you think would be of interest to this sort of stuff. I'm going to do more on these sorts of videos, but yeah, this is it for now. Goodbye.